Okay, I think everyone's here. Do I convene or do you convene?
No, you're
I
the
convene.
chair.
I'm the convening chair. This is my last act as chair of the Formula Advisory Committee. Welcome, everyone. I thought it would be a good idea. We have some new members that we go around the table and introduce ourselves for the benefit of the committee. So if we want to start with you.
All right. Elmo Gavin, Texas Tech University Health Science Center.
John McCall, University of Texas Dell Medical School.
Myrna Gonzalez, UT RGV Medical School.
Barry Nelson, Texas A&M Health Science Center.
Kevin Dillon, University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston.
Angelica Hill, UT Southwestern.
Rick Lang, Texas Tech University Health Science Center in El Paso.
Ed Buchanan, Coordinating Board.
John Harmon, University of North Texas Health Science Center, Fort Worth.
And I'm Andrea Marks from the UT Health Science Center in San Antonio. Okay, so our first order of business is to elect a new chair. I guess what I'd like to do is just open up to the committee for a nomination.
Madam Chair, I'd like to place the name of John Harmon in for chair of the committee for this next session.
Thank you very much. Do I get a second or do we discuss? I'm so bad at Robert's rules.
I second the motion.
Second? Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion? John, if elected, do you agree to serve?
I do.
Thank you. Any
That's
discussion?
an important question.
I remembered to ask it, and I don't think anybody asked me last time.
So the whole thing is under review or
Yeah. There being no discussion, do we want to take a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, you're our chair.
Thank you.
There were two other officer positions that we wanted to discuss. Last year we had a vice chair. I leave that to you. The coordinating board has also requested a secretary. We have not had a secretary in the past, so if you'd like to open those two up for discussion and election.
I would like to recommend Kevin Dillon,
As the secretary?
Secretary.
I would second that nomination. Kevin, would you agree to serve?
I suggest we not ask him.
Let's stop there.
Yes, I will, Madam Former.
Former chairman, yeah. Okay, got it. Do you want to call for a vote of that, I guess?
Okay. So did we have a motion then already in a second? So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Great.
So do we want to talk about a vice chair then?
Sure.
I think, and Kevin served in that role, I think, with you last year, right? And that was very helpful, I think, especially if it's first time in that role. So I would like to see if there's a nomination for you to be, or I could make the nomination, I'm not sure if I can do that as chair, for you to serve in that capacity if you could through this term.
So
Sure.
move.
Okay.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
All right.
All right,
All
perfect.
opposed? Okay, good. Motion carries.
Great.
Do I take the lead?
I think the baton is passed.
You're in charge.
You're in charge.
Lost much with batons.
That's right.
Okay, well, we have our, I think you have your agenda. Hopefully you brought your papers with you that were sent out by Ed. And so the next item on the agenda, I believe, is Ed will give us a briefing on the health-related institutions funding formulas.
Okay, I'm going to briefly point out some of the results of the last legislative session. This is from the document that's headed up the Commissioner's Charge to the Health-Related Committee. And this kind of highlights some of the high points. For the instruction and operations formula, the legislature appropriated $98.29 per FPSE, and the dollar amount for that represented $1,170 million, and that was an 8% increase in funding over 14-15, and that compares to a 6% increase in your FTSEs. So in terms of outcomes of the legislature, in terms of what the last time's formula committee wanted, you achieved 89% of your funding request on that particular formula. On the infrastructure formula, the two rates were $6.65 and $6.26, and that represents a $265.4 million, and that is a 6.87% increase compared to a 6% increase in predicted square feet. And the dollar funding represents 70% of what you requested in the 13 formula committee. For research enhancement, the key rate was 1.23%. That represented $74.6 million, and that was an 8.56% increase over 14-15, and that compares with a 5.73% increase in research expenditures. For the research formula, you received 67% of what the committee requested in 13. For mission-specific, the increase was 6.98% for a total of $323 million, and that represents 88.5% of the amount requested by the committee. For graduate medical education, there was a total appropriation of $70.2 million, which is an increase of 30.7% over 14-15. And that's compared to a 6.88% increase in residents. Appropriations were $62.66 per resident per year. And that amount is 94% of the rate that you requested from the committee in 13. And then additionally, there was additional GME funding to the coordinating board of $53 million that was trusteed to be distributed to GME programs. So that kind of gives you a highlighted summary of the outcome and kind of set the stage for our discussions in the meeting. There on page 4, we have the 4 charges from the commissioner, with charges 1 to 3 being fairly standard charges. Charge 4 is the new one that's added to make recommendations to meet the goals of the 60 by 30 TX plan. And then there is, I guess, if it's okay with the chair, I will go ahead and expand a little bit on charge 1 in terms of some handout materials that have been provided to the committee members. But before we do that, I guess I would open the floor. Are there any questions thus far on what I've presented? Okay. As a part of, well, first of all, if you would pull out the 2 spreadsheet attachments that I sent. They're colored in green and red circles. These 2 items relate to an issue that has that we're bringing to the committee's attention in regard to how certain data is input into the infrastructure, into the space model, which directly feeds the infrastructure formula for predicted square feet. If I could direct your attention to the one with the red circles on it. The left-hand set of numbers in that box area represents the existing space model methodology that's been in place at least since, well, as far as back as I could determine.
Ed, when did you send that one out? I don't have.
Pardon?
I don't think I have that.
That was in the email that was provided to you.
On August 3rd?
Yes.
I may have not printed that version.
so if you can look on. Basically, I feel like that we have coordinating board staff working with management have reviewed this this particular methodology, and I'll draw your attention to the lower section of the left-hand box where it has adjustments.
Could we get an extra copy or two? Because
if you want.
Myrna doesn't have it.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't get it either.
How many people need copies? 1, 2.
I think the committee, yeah, I think,
6. Okay. Well, if y'all want to have a brief recess,
I actually thought that was the secretary's job.
I wasn't even nominated.
Yeah, that's,
it's still your fault.
yeah.
If y'all will like to
I
have
think
a
the
brief
problem is that some of us just brought the summary document and not
Yeah.
all the
Okay.
tabs that were sent out. Yeah.
If we could have a brief recess, I will make it so. If we can continue, and for the new handout, if you go to page 3 where the red boxes are, I think the issue in question is a fairly simple, I guess, a fairly simple situation that the adjustments that are being made to reduce E&G expenditures are removing all hospital and clinic revenue from the institution's E&G expenditures. And we feel like this is, I think from a methodology standpoint, an inappropriate calculation to mix subtracting all of your revenues from your accumulated E&G expenditures. Obviously, some of those revenues were not spent in education and really bear no direct relationship to the E&G expenditures. The right-hand box shows one alternate method of perhaps addressing the situation, which would basically just remove that adjustment, and then in the yellow section there you would see the format would be changed such that any operating uses spent in support of hospital and clinics would be completely taken out of the E&G expenditures, and obviously we have one of those for every institution. Now, if I could draw your attention to the first 2 pages, we have a summary there of all these detail pages. The top section is the existing methodology, and the bottom section is the alternate, and the third section is the difference. So obviously I expect it to be somewhat controversial, to say the least, given the very radical change in funding that this type of change might make. So I think that kind of lays out the issue for the committee, and I'll let the committee determine how it would like to approach this issue. I think in terms of introduction of issues and perhaps changes, we have, as all of you have probably noticed, we have 2 new institutions at the table. And we have been asked by the LBB to provide some additional information to them for the next funding cycle. And basically, in order to accomplish that, the coordinating board is basically going to be providing data from the health-related sector to the LBB in three ways. One way will be the existing the 10 existing health-related institutions will be one method. The second method will be the 12 institutions, including the 2 new medical schools. Then a possible third way will be the 12 medical schools and additional allied health programs from the 2 new institutions. So that level of data will be provided to the LBB. I believe that in the interest of efficiency, the coordinating board determined that the formula advisory committees would work on the basically the option of including the medical center, the 2 new schools, medical schools in the HRI formula for recommendation purposes, and that will go through to the commissioner and to the board. The other 2 options will just be sending the raw data to the LBB. So if Emily would like to make any additional comments or corrections, I'd be happy to.
Can you repeat that first comment that you made, that the decision has been made that they're included in the HRI formula? And so we're just looking at the three different...
I'm saying that from the work of this committee, the committee should include them with the other HRI formulas. HRI formulas, excuse me. It will be up to the final decision will be made sometime by the LBB in the next funding cycle. So I think it remains to be seen ultimately which way that it would eventually come out in the next appropriation cycle. So I don't know that I have a hard and fast answer there.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm the newest member, and
Yes.
so would this be an opportunity for us as a committee to look at various options? The way this is obviously it's new to all. It's certainly new to me. It may be new to I think it's new to everybody else here, and to talk about various options, pros and cons, and to provide that way we can provide information to our legislators and also to the LDB.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I think there's.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a good recommendation. I think there's several things in the mix when we look at this. I mean, I guess one thing I was looking to Ed for on clarity, though. You said one of the options was sending the raw data to the LBB. Does that mean the LBB proposes some sort of funding methodology, or does that?
Well, I would say I would presume that would be the case.
And if I may, I can kind of jump in
Oh,
there. So
yes,
in preliminary discussions, we've talked about that we will need to have data in different ways to provide to the legislature so they can determine how they want to treat the 2 new institutions. Since this is kind of a new way of doing the institutions where they combine the general academics with medical schools, we want to have options so the legislature can look at how they want to fund them in the formulas. This has been very preliminary. We haven't made any decisions regarding what exact data needs to be done. We're still having to work through our process to determine what that data will look like. But kind of the way we were discussing it was we would just want options for the legislature to look at.
So is this the kind of thing, asking out of ignorance or naivete, is this something the LBB would like input from the committee from about looking at the various?
We would always like input from the committee. If this was something y'all wanted to discuss and provide information or thoughts to us, we would love that. I mean, very much appreciate
What other
that.
options are they going to consider?
Well, the 3 ones that we had preliminarily discussed, and as I mentioned, this is something that we're still looking at and needs to go through our process and everything to determine what will be the final requested ones, was regards to having medical schools funded through the HRI formulas and the rest of the academic funded through the GAI formulas. The other option was looking at having all of the allied health and health programs out of the 2 new institutions funded through the HRI formulas, and the remainder of the academic sectors funded through the GAI formulas. And the last one that was thrown out there was regarding to if the medical students would need to be funded through the academic formulas. When we met with UT Austin and UTRGV, that did seem to be a problematic data request, so it is something we're looking at with whether it will be asked for or not.
So would that mean that it would be possible for some health, or most of the health science centers then to have two different funding schemes? They would basically have HRI funding for their medical schools, and if they had pharmacy or they had public health or something else, they would have it funded under the general academic model?
There hasn't been any discussion,
Okay.
and like I said, this is all very early on in discussion, where a health-related right now would be funded in any different
Okay.
way than they have been funded in the past.
I guess the
It's a follow-on question, I think, to what you were asking. In option 3, that would include additional allied health programs. Is that for allied health programs that are to be created, new ones, or does it contemplate existing ones where there would be a choice?
For like UT Austin, there's an existing pharmacy, college of
Right.
pharmacy, and school of nursing. And so that's, option 3 is saying, well, okay, would that blanket cover those as well? And right now, what the president of the university had, there's a selection in this preliminary meeting they talked about, was not addressing that at this time, only looking at the medical school, and so that would require the medical school to carve out separately, which we're already doing, expenses, research, all that completely separate from the university. And so just the medical school would be included in HRI, and it would leave the rest of the university alone to be included in GAI like it is today. And this decision, my understanding is, would not affect existing health institutions, so it wouldn't start asking them to split and carve up or anything like that. It would just be affecting these two new ones, and they would be, the campus essentially would be split and addressed separately.
How's
That
A&M
makes sense.
handling it since the merger?
Well, I really didn't want to date myself, but why not? Back in the
A&M
back-
is different, though, because what you have, your health science center is still a separate state agency.
Yeah,
from
but
the
back
general
in
academic.
the
Oh,
day,
okay, so
back
they
in the
didn't
day,
Merge and
before, in fact, when we came into being as a health related, so it's pre-99, 2000, we were actually a part of the general academic. So, but it didn't have a formula for
Right.
health related at that juncture.
The whole system was kind of different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we still got a bill pattern. We had everything divided out separately, like you're talking about, but it was, so it did exist within the general academic in and of itself.
But there weren't formulas for the health related, so that was a moot
It's a different
point.
deal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
different deal.
So,
Well, I must admit, I'm kind of confused by this. And, Murda and John, nothing personal or anything, but, this is a general academic institution, formula advisory committee, and there's a health-related institution. It doesn't say health-related programs, And so I'm a little confused as to why we're in this together. My thought on this was the obvious charge was to the general academic institution formula committee to come up with a weight for medicine, to accommodate them. And so I'm a little confused how we went that direction. I don't know how you're going to get, in other words, to your first option. Your first option, you said, was treat the two institutions as though they were part of the general academic formula. You can't get there unless you make that charge to the general academics. You can come back later if you've got another charge from the LBB that says, all right, now suppose they were in the health related. You know what the health related, medical school weights are and so forth. So that can be calculated. You know what it is for pharmacy and for nursing. Although if you do that for these two institutions, you've got a whole bunch of other general academics with those kind of, disciplines that are going to be very upset.
Yeah.
So I think we're setting a bad precedent here. I really do. I don't agree with this decision at all. And like I say, nothing personal, guys.
Our intent isn't to create a slippery slope at all, but, things are changing. I'm in the middle of everything down there that's being created that's part of the change, and I think things are changing up here also.
Oh, could I ask, does the LBB have a response? Would you like to add any clarification, or are you able to at this point?
I'm not able to say what for sure will be requested at the end of the day. We're still working through our process. And like I said, we like input. We will take whatever input or recommendations or opinions from this committee or from anyone else on how they would like to see things done in the future. What we kind of are looking for is that we need to make sure that we have flexibility to provide the legislature whatever they want to request during the upcoming session. So that's kind of the theme that we're operating under.
Well, see, we've had now, for the past 3 sessions, I think, we've had this kind of battle out there about nursing and pharmacy. The general academics, versus the health-related formula rates. I thought we'd put that to bed. Evidently, we haven't. But the issue was always one that there's a different formula weight in the health-related from general academics, because the general academics have 40 or 50,000 students to spread all of those costs that are covered by the INO formula. In other words, INO formula is not just classroom instruction, we all know. It also includes your administration, your library, your student services, blah, blah, blah. And when you cover that over 40 or 50,000 students, that cost per student is much less than trying to cover it over 3,000 or 4,000 students in a typical health-related institution. So that's the reason that there is a difference in weights between general academics and health-related.
And Andrew, you asked how we were handling. We handled it with an arm's length agreement. So if they're providing services, we pay them for those services.
Okay.
And
So any
to maintain a
consolidation that you
separation
guys,
between
any consolidation that you guys benefited from
some of
with
our
the
student service
merger.
consolidate,
Right.
we assess it, we provide the funds to do that, and then we provide oversight to make sure it happens.
So you have sources and uses just
Yes.
for this
Yes.
HRI.
And not, to be accurate, that's how the Dell Medical School was set up as well. Well, it's part of the University of Texas campus. Proviso for its existence was that it would not impact the existing academic campus 1 cent. And so any services the medical school gets from the academic campus is contracted by and paid for independently. And the medical school gets no benefit of common facilities or anything else. So whether that changes your mind at all, but that's how this was set up. to be an arm's length.
You bet Elmo.
The incremental changes have to be different.
Yeah.
When I buy my library services and I change between 400 and 500 students, it's different than adding 400 students to 40,000. So the incremental costs are
Probably a
different.
marginal cost model.
Yeah,
for the
when I
most
say marginal,
part.
incremental cost and marginal
Yeah.
cost. Yeah.
I guess-
And we're still working through that. I mean, we're
Yeah.
very focused right now on 9-1 for the university side, and the medical school will open next fall. So all of that is still being sorted out.
Well, you're kind of a year later down the cycle than Austin is. I mean,
Aren't
as
your
far
classes
as having.
starting
No, our
active
classes are
students.
actually starting at the same time. We're just very focused. I mean, we
We're
had
also
to
merging
close
two
down Brownsville and
institutions.
Pan Am and start up the university side all in 1 year, so.
Well, I'm glad I was able to bring up a topic that hadn't been stalled. So obviously, it looks like there's room for discussion.
And, you
guys
know-
want some input into it.
That would be great.
Okay.
From the perspective of being on the GRI formula, there will be similar issues for the medical school. It's going to be a much smaller class. There's a cost study, and what the tuition charged by the medical schools is much higher than what the tuition charged by the other university programs. So there will be issues either way.
In order to get the full picture, though, whether you're in HRI or GAI formula worlds, has LBB, Emily, have you contemplated getting an option that, to Elmo's point, would include the programs in general academic formulas to try to get a full picture of the options?
Yeah, we've discussed it
Have you?
internally. I mean, we haven't discussed it with LBB.
That was one of the options that was presented at the meeting with the coordinating board, would be the third option of having medical students run through the general academic program.
So creating a weight in the GAI.
Yeah, that's one of the options on the academic side. Obviously, it's,
So they're talking about that over there, Ed?
well, I don't know to what
It's not
extent
charged.
they're talking about it, but it's one of the options for which the coordinating board will provide data to the LBB, okay? I think that as I understand our direction from management, the options that are on the table for the coordinating board to make a recommendation on would be In the health-related sector, the 2 medical schools will be included in the formulas, and that's all. For the I guess a dollar recommendation or a rate recommendation, so to speak, from this committee. Then conversely, on the academic side, theirs would only include the academics and the health professions they have at the current time. So I think that was the way it was envisioned, that these things would flow through the formula committees and to the commissioner, and then for a board recommendation. The other,
And that was all through the HRI formula, right? The way you described it just now. That option.
well, the HRI option is going to be the existing 10 institutions plus the 2 medical
Right.
schools.
Plus
Okay.
their related health,
No,
only the
No.
medical schools.
for recommendation purposes, only the medical schools.
Okay.
Data-wise, the coordinating board will be sending over the necessary data for the LBB to do the other calculation. Okay? It's a little confusing. There's been a lot of meeting and a lot of discussion. It is extremely complicated. So I think at least how I would see this committee, that's kind of the way we would like to see the committee proceed. If the committee wants to address the other 2 options at hand, I mean, that's the committee's prerogative. But
Ed, I'm still confused as to how the coordinating board is going to make a recommendation to the LBB about inclusion of the 2 institutions in the general academic formula. There is no weight. Somebody's got to create a weight for
No,
medicine
I
in the
think
general
you're-
academic formula.
I think you're, let me explain it. The only recommendation that will come out of the academic side will, for the Formula Advisory Committee and the Commissioner and the Board, will be the existing allied health programs and the health professions. There won't be any medical schools in their, in that track, okay?
Those would continue under the general academic formula. Only the medical school would go under the HRI.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Does that clarify it for
No.
you?
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but no, it
So
doesn't.
the
clarify.
third option that Emily mentioned was having medical students flow through the GAI, and your point is
Yeah.
how?
Okay,
There's no
And
well-
that's an identified issue with that option. So that is something we're looking at with regards to any of these options. What are the issues with doing it in any different form or manner? And like I said, this is all very preliminary. We
Sure.
have not decided exactly what data will be requested at the end of the day. This is just ideas and discussion purpose.
But you're not going to get that feedback from the general academic institution because that's not a charge to that formula advisory committee.
And that's a decision of the coordinating board regarding the charges.
So Ed, are we being asked to advise then on bringing the 2 medical schools into the HRI formula, and how that would impact the formula? And then what the overall pool of funding would have to be to basically maintain the same rates of funding as in the 16-17
Well,
funding scheme,
you
and
know-
what we might have to increase it beyond that?
I would say this. I think for things to work cleanly, we would prefer to see those 2 schools included in a recommendation come out of the board. At least then it can proceed on in parallel with what the academic side is doing, and at least be coordinated in that aspect. If there are other concerns or other opinions, you're welcome to, I'm not going to put any constraints on you, okay? I mean, it's
Mr. Chairman, I mean, again, I'm going to claim ignorant, being young. When I'm old, you can claim I'm ignorant as well. It's an important issue to everybody. It's important to get it right, because it's not just these 2 institutions. We're talking about the precedent we're going to be setting for the next 10 and 20 years. And I think being able to discuss all the options available and pros and cons and presenting several options, my legislators are certainly interested in this issue, and they realize there's not a single viewpoint, and they'd like to be knowledgeable about all the viewpoints and how to address them. So I mean, if that's open to us as a charge as a committee, I'd recommend, Chairman, that we at least talk about it and present the various options.
Well, let's talk about, is there an interest, by including the medical schools in the HRI, the 2 new medical schools formula, we're talking about keeping parity among the formulary so that they're funded similarly. You bring up a good point, I think, about the marginal cost if you're already on a campus with infrastructure. So, I don't know that your overall cost model would be cheaper, but I don't know that it would be comparable either to a full-blown health science center that has, all of its infrastructure, maybe similar. But I guess I would think there would be an interest in funding the medical schools consistently, and it's just an opinion. But I would also expect that we would want the funding to not be diminished in at least its rate or base amounts as a result of absorbing the 2 additional schools. But I would also think we'd still want to promote that we expect some increase, and Commissioner Parada seemed to indicate that it may not be realistic to get back to the 2000-2001 levels that we've all been striving for, and we really didn't get the second increment that we had recommended through the last session. We got an increase, but we're at, I think, 9,800 on the base, and we were shooting for 10.5, and we want to get back ultimately to 11.3. So I guess with those caveats, those are the concerns probably all of us around the table have, that we want to see these 2 schools successful. We want to see them adequately funded. We don't want that to happen at the disadvantage to the other schools, because it is a stretch to cover budgets, and I think all schools are trying to figure out how they can boost their non-state revenues, because it's uncertain going into the future how much continuing growth we'll have in state funding over time. It seems like, if you look across the nation, most funding in most states, it continues to decline. Texas has been able to benefit from the good oil and gas industry, but we have a very strong growth in the need for services in the state because of the growing population. And, I don't know how the tax base might change and those kinds of things, but that's just some of the ideas I'd put out on the table to see, do we want to have a little broader discussion, or do we think we would be ready to make any sort of motion or suggestion from this meeting?
Well, I think to your point, there's a recognized at state level, obviously, the population explosion, a shortage of physicians and other healthcare providers. And so, yes, the intent of these 2 new institutions was to address those issues and not to do it by bleeding the existing health institutions, certainly. So, I think that would be recommendation number 1, is to retain the existing rates, which obviously increases the pool of funding for these institutions. And I think just the unique nature of the health institutions was the reason that after weighing kind of several options, that it made sense to those making the recommendations that these schools be included with the HRI, because it was just more convoluted to try and shoehorn them into the GAI. And I would see, I know, and you can share more on this, Barry, but with throwing the College Station campus blanket over the Health Science Center, but I don't know if there was ever a consideration of saying, well, now you need to be put under the GAI formula. It was always...
it's kind of like I'm alluded to. Administratively, it's under the umbrella, but it's still a separate agency, and there's still that arm's length agreement via contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a modification, but it's still identifiable sources and uses.
I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that, as far as from my perspective, what we're doing here with this move is we're changing this from a health-related institution formula advisory committee to a health-related program formula advisory committee. And the future, we're going to have to invite all those health professions and all the general academics around the state, because if this is successful, the other's going to be knocking on the door, wanting to be part of this group instead of the general academic institution group. So that begs the question, do you blow up the formulas and start all over statewide? They
one-
got 'em
I think-
old,
I
they
think
won't go
though,
around.
I mean, similar issues will come up with the other formulas also. Research. And in terms of separating out the costs,
Well, and I think,
well,
I guess
then
that's
that
what,
goes to, do we want to do a cost study? And I would advise.
Please, anything but a cost.
No.
Yeah. And in terms of in terms of going back to John's point about not bleeding, I mean, the legislature funds enrollment growth. And,
They did this time. but they haven't
Sometimes the
in past.
legislature funds enrollment growth.
well, and
Not
I think to your point, I was thinking of all of the formulas except for the mission specific, of course. But INO research infrastructure, it's research and infrastructure that are going to be harder for you than the INO. I mean, head counts. FTSE is FTSE. So, how do you decide which research space counts for the GAI research formulas versus the HRI research formulas and infrastructure costs? And there's going to have to be some sort of allocation. I think that's what was sort of boggling to me. And to Elmo's point, in terms of the pharmacy and nursing, the same types of programs that we have, there's a bigger student base to spread those infrastructure costs over than in the HRIs. So how do you decide which formula? Is it, you were, in these proposals, I was assuming it's all formulas, right? Those medical schools in, not just the INO.
Yes, it's something we would look at for every formula regarding how it would work.
Wow.
Right.
Well, the model and getting the numbers is fairly easy to do if you're going to do the HRI formula. I mean, based on whatever.
But their inputs.
Yeah, their inputs, which is 0 right now, so I can do that one. But that being determined, maybe, depends on what Nancy would say. But that being said, so then the question is, okay, use that formula to generate the dollar pool required, and does it reside within a general academic, their responsibility to fund that, and on that side, or is it an HRI? I mean,
Well,
that
I
seems
think-
easy enough to do.
I mean, obviously, there's the option if the LBB decided to run the calculations through the HRI formula and stick it in the academic bill pattern. I guess that could be done. I just, at this point in time, we're working on fairly limited guidance. However, we're dictated by a cycle that has started. Here we are, August 12th, and in order to properly split things out, institutions this fall will be needing to separate their reporting so it can get into the space model for 2015, which will be used by the commissioner and the board next spring in its recommendation to the legislature. So the cycle is pretty well fixed, and it's a fairly involved process. So, we're doing what we can do at the moment, I guess.
But the precedent sets, I mean, again, I'm looking down the road. I mean, I want to get it right. I mean, because it affects the health of the two institutions. We want them to be healthy and survive, and we don't want any of our institutions to diminish at the same time. So I really think it's, again, I'd like to struggle with it. I'd like to wrestle with it to get some mind trying to get several options on the board. Because this will go not only to this committee, but all the legislators as well. I want to make sure we get it right.
So who could go through that exercise for us in terms of, I mean, are we talking about a pros and cons in terms of costs or in terms of risks or challenges in the future with the different options?
All right, so in my experience here, about an hour and 25 minutes, Andrea, I think that there are several options that ought to be looked at. I mean, and there have been 3 or 4 different options presented here, and I think what that allows us to do is kind of weigh, because there'll be pluses and minuses to each of them, and each of them puts a different value on it. But at least we enter knowing what's going to happen, how likely is it to be successful, is it funding, if there are issues about how to allocate research space. Heck, if I was starting a new medical center and I had a different funding for my research space, suddenly all that GAI space would be my space. I mean, I'd take it in a minute. I'm not that dumb. And if they had better funding, I'd use them. So how do we approach all those things, not only for funding but for input as well? And
It may be that we need a work group with Ed's help, but going back to what Elmo said, I do see his point in that maybe it's not so much about the funding as it is the fundamental change in funding methodology. I mean, we have had other programs that were on general academic institutions lobbied basically this committee to get into this formula model because in some cases it is more advantageous from a revenue perspective, but you would also have to say, does it really reflect the costs that they incur on a general academic campus? And I don't know. But I could see where it could be a slippery slope that if you admit new programs into the formula that are already on an academic campus or are being placed on an academic campus, then other health-related programs could say, well, we want in too. Why are we separated out? Then it brings it to a whole other situation where you either have commingled or different funding methodologies on one campus versus one methodology, and I guess it could get confusing, like you mentioned, from the standpoint of how do you appropriate for your expense reports, how do you really designate or allocate or with certainty what space is used for which, especially with the growing interprofessional education that is happening in a lot of campuses where you have more shared teaching and clinical experiences among the different levels of schools and colleges.
Oh, one thing I would point out that Barry might be able to elaborate a little bit more, but particularly using A&M in their situation as an example, they allocate space and everything into the space model, and their facilities built into that reporting vehicle to accommodate that, okay? And send the data in two different streams, back to the formula. So there is a vehicle to accommodate that, assuming that was that direction.
We have fairly defined space with campus. We had the two buildings we historically had, and we built a new campus out on Highway 47. So, and then dentistry and the other larger inputs. So our space has been defined for several years for our existence and continues to be so. And if there is a modification, we do a contract with them, say, okay, you can use that space and here's what it costs, and we modify our formula numbers. And that's pretty simple, quite honestly. And there's been very little use of that space. Now, A&M continues to grow like crazy, and I'm sure there'll be more challenges in the future, but at this juncture, it's still well at hand. And y'all probably have very defined space where you are now.
We do, and as you may or may not know, the new buildings under construction are all 100% defined for the medical institution. There's a research building, clinical office, education space. The Dell Pediatric building on the old Miller Airport campus is 100% medical school. The research activity goes on there, medical related. So at least as it stands right now, it's very relatively easy to draw a line around costs that are 100% medical schools, the revenues that are, all that. So there's not any
Won't your basic science FTEs, though, come from some of the basic, or will you stand up all new basic science?
There will be some dual appointments. So they'll have, for the percentage of time they're appointed, obviously they'll have those costs.
Okay.
And any medical related research will be done in the medical research building.
So they'll have two different labs now?
Well, what's being talked about right now is like joint research. It's going to, with other 100% medical faculty, and that'll be done in our building to the extent they're doing other research that's not medical school related, then they may have a lab on campus, but that won't be integrated with the medical school.
Maybe more complicated.
I think we need a fourth option.
Francis has a comment.
Sorry.
Just wanted to clarify, because on the space model, since most of it, other than the clinical space, is predicted. It's not the actual facility space. It's being able to keep the books right on the expenses related to the medical school and so forth. That will drive the predicted square footage, not actually looking at the blueprint and seeing all the space being used by medical.
But it's predicted based on FTE and research expenditures, right?
Right, and so it'll be
So
an
if
accounting
you-
of those
Those are
types of
shared.
expenses
Right.
related to the medical
How do you
school,
figure that?
separate from the rest of the institution. So that would be sort of the key distinction on the infrastructure side.
So we're just starting. So, like, for instance, how do you all figure out the research based on faculty? You have faculty that are appointed to the School of Medicine.
Yes.
So that's what we will have. We'll have faculty appointed to the School of Medicine. Right now, the faculty that we'll have initially will be transferring over from UT Health Science Center San Antonio, and then we're hiring new faculty that are going to be reporting to the Dean of the College of Medicine. So the faculty will be kept separate. The space is separate. Right now, we have the Regional Academic Health Center building in Harlingen. We have the South Texas Diabetes and Obesity Institute, which is in Brownsville, and then we're building a new building in Edinburgh.
So when you say the faculty are separate, none of the basic faculty at UT will be teaching in the medical school, will have no percent effort there?
I don't believe so, but I mean, I'm in the finance office. I'm not in the School of Medicine, so I'll have to go back.
I am, so there will be no sure services.
But there will be a way, I'm assuming, to split.
They are
You
looking
know
at
it.
some of the science faculty to provide some of the basic science. That's how they wrote their LCME application. They had a core of basic science faculty, so it's the same situation as in Dell, but it'll just be a fraction of their FTE.
And I'm assuming
which is
we'll
what
be
you have
able
to capture.
to calculate that. And the research is actually a whole other question from instruction.
Well,
So
Is that a timer?
We're not going to solve the issue today, so I guess.
Yeah, and I guess I'm struggling with where do we go from here? Do we attempt to help the LBB and the coordinating board recognize the issues of each of the different options, like you mentioned, that we don't have to make a decision. Sometimes it's just getting the information that's helpful to the members of the committee and certainly to the LBB and the legislators.
I want the LBB to be very cognizant of the fact that the formulas are a way of distributing these two pots of money. We know there's a pot of money for the general academic institutions, and there's a pot of money for the health-related. Right? We know that the appropriations bill defines which of us are GAIs and which of us are HRIs. And so now all of a sudden we've got two of the GAIs coming over into this health-related institution pot of money. So when you add money to that pot in the future, don't hold it against the rest of us and say, well, the the health-related's got theirs because of the increases that are required going to the new institutions coming in here, the general academic institutions. And I'm just concerned that could be a potential downfall for us. And I repeat, we're going to have all the other health professions coming in. It's not a health-related institution formal advisory committee anymore. It won't be. I'm done.
No, you're not.
Until next time.
Here it again.
to make a recommendation to this committee.
We were not naive coming here thinking it was going to be welcome with
Kumbaya.
open arms.
We said no personal.
Well, just the structure, but I know the concern is that it would be a zero-sum game, and that any gain on our side would be a loss on existing, and we certainly don't want that. I mean, we want gains for all, obviously, right? I mean, we're all
Well, hey,
educated.
UT Austin can't be held harmless on this. I mean,
But
Oh, yeah, that's part of the deal.
But that's, I was party to just a couple of preliminary conversations, and it just like, okay, it's a entity that hasn't existed before in the history of Texas. And so everybody's grappling with it. That just is, if we toss it over the fence to the GII, then they're grappling. It's the same conversation. As they look different, they feel different, they sound different. How do we fund them? They look more like those guys. Those guys don't. So it's
They
kind
don't
of
want
what makes what makes most sense from, you know, and I look at it and I know this is probably even fair, but from a clean slate, if you were starting it today, what makes most sense the way these entities operate? You know, and who's to say that UT Austin might eventually say, okay, well, maybe this growing health thing should just be its own standalone health science center instead of part of UT Austin. I've heard that mentioned in the birth of this, and I don't know where that goes, but
Like Vanderbilt.
so
Right.
yeah. So who knows? I mean, what exists today may look completely different in 5 years. I don't know, but it's right now it's just trying to what looks more like one than the other, and I guess that's where we stand today, and the reason why we're sitting at this table instead of the room next door.
Well, maybe what we need is a work group, because I think you're right. You know, we're looking at it. It's a little different for this group, but the GAIs are looking at it. It's a little different for them as well. So it's kind of hard to figure where does it fit best. Maybe we have a work group that looks at the pros and cons of being within or outside of the HRI. And I guess at this time we're not talking about other health-related programs, right? Only college.
Well, I
Only
think
the
we need
medical
to.
school.
I think we need to talk about the pros and cons of the
both?
3 options.
Which I think really speaks to the
LVB is
impact or precedent that it does or doesn't.
Or if there might be another option.
Or if there's another option.
Not named yet.
And I don't know that we need to make a recommendation. Maybe it's just an advisement or a white paper basically enlightening those who do end up making the decision on some key points that should be considered in the process. Was that?
Well, whatever y'all feel is appropriate as a committee. I mean, I'm not putting any constraints on you one way or the other.
Can our work group be supplemented with experts?
I would
Or
presume so,
Is that
yeah.
okay? Because I think it might be helpful to have maybe either someone from the LBB to talk about what they've been thinking about.
Yeah, I agree.
And, I know we've got system folks who, I don't know anything about the GAI formula, and I was hoping not to have to learn it.
But there again, too,
There you go.
in the interest of efficiency, I don't know that it's advisable for us to get involved in the GAI formula as such. To me, personally, that's a little bit outside our scope. I don't know how the other
Well, but
members feel.
if one of the options is to have a different weighting within the GI, I think that does actually fall within our scope, Ed.
Well,
What concerns me is the non-INO formulas, because there are similar formulas in the GAI that are calculated much differently than ours, research and infrastructure in particular.
And is there going to be a discrete decision made for each of them, or the decision that you made for INO? But if they're going to be, the new institutions be treated.
Yeah, I mean, I
like
think all of
HRIs
those
for
points need to be
INO.
sort of laid out for the committee to see and at least take a position on, or at least bring up as these things need to be considered. Because we don't want some unintended consequences to occur down the road when, to your point, this is all my research space now because this is a better formula. We have to be able to set some parameters. We're not trying to increase the cost to the state. We're trying to increase the number of medical students, medical school graduates.
And that means an increase in cost in the state.
Well, it does, but not for existing we're not trying to increase the cost to get what they already got in terms of research and infrastructure.
So, Ed and Andrea, do you think then the best course of action would be to establish a work group then?
I think so. We've usually
and-
done that by telephone.
yeah, I think that would be
Okay.
appropriate.
And we could have LBB clarify the different options that have been laid out, the 3 or 4 options, and then evaluate the pros and cons for those specific options based on what we know or historically have known. And then does this, what is the impact or potential precedent, and is it negative, is it positive, is it neutral, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like.
Do we need a motion for that?
To establish a work group, you can just appoint a work group. I mean, I think it's important to get the minutes of all this, and
Yeah.
we've got all this written up, so that
We're recording it.
I move that we establish a work group.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Everybody want to be on it?
All opposed?
Wait, that's another committee meeting.
I think the motion carries then. So is this something we do offline through communications?
We usually do it, through email, and we'll have a
Okay.
phone call, go over. We did that last time for small class. We had a couple of phone calls.
Yeah, and I would just, I mean, I think it's an important issue that we give sufficient time to, but I think Ed would tell us, and we all know we have a pretty short timeline in general for this committee, so we really have to make substantial progress probably by the next meeting, and certainly before the October meeting to be able to have it into a draft, or if it doesn't go into the report, maybe it's a side document.
Yeah, we studied lots
Yeah.
of things last time
Okay.
as a group that didn't make it into the
Okay.
report, but that were informative, I think, to everyone. So if I would be willing to take the lead on that if you want me to organize that,
That would be great.
and then maybe get some documents together that the group can look at. If you're okay with that?
Okay, that would be great. Thank
Okay.
you. So, are we back to the commissioner's charges?
Well, yeah, I think so. To what extent, I don't know to what extent it's appropriate to address any of those other items,
given
but
this, yeah.
I guess you can open the floor for discussion if
Well, I guess the, items 1, 2, and 3 maybe not contingent upon, those people may have different positions depending on the outcome of the work group, but I guess we could go through these briefly. So, item 1 is to look at funding levels for the INO formula, infrastructure research enhancement, the GME, and it's basically looking at the base rate. And then item 2 is looking at the weightings. I think historically the weightings haven't changed in recent years, and that has to do, of course, with the weightings for medical students versus public health or pharmacy, and then whether or not there are specialty programs in the INO formula that need to be included. So, do we want to go through that, or?
well, one thing I would like to see out of the committee today is some direction to me in regards to the levels you want to shoot for next time in terms of rates. I think the methodology last time was to move toward the 2000-2001 rates, and we've kind of in summary we're not quite there. We're at 98.29 for INO, and the 001 rate's 11.383, and then the infrastructure rates would almost have to double, as well as the research enhancement rate would have to more than double. Now, GME would need to go from 62.66 to 84.44. So, one thing I'm in the process of working for the INO formula is to pull the data for the 2 new medical schools and get that integrated into the INO formula, so we have a vehicle to look at some numbers there. But if you want to go back to the 00 and 01 rates as a committee, let me know, and I will do some preliminary drafts of amounts to reflect that.
Sorry, Ed, or John, I mean, I guess I don't know if it's been 6 years or 8 years now that some variation of our mantra here has been, get us back to 11,383, right, or similar numbers for the other formulas. I mean, at some point, I think when Leon Leach was chair, he said, I think this is the last time we're going to do this.
Get 2 more chairs.
So much for what I did and what you did.
Yeah.
So, variations on the theme of get us back to those good old days of here, I don't remember them being that great. But in 2000, when we were getting, again, $11,383 per base rate per FTSE, and then similar numbers for the other formulas. At some point, those are now 16, maybe by the time we actually put this in place, these would be 18-year-old data, not inflation adjusted, I would note. So I don't know, maybe we need a new theme, a new call to action.
But our theme had been consistency. That's what we were talking about. We wanted to have a consistent theme. We don't want to change our approach every biennium.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, we can't hope, if we can't even get back to the level of funding in 2000, we can't hope for any inflation on top of that.
No, right.
So I'm not, anti just sticking with that level. But I'm not, we can go a different route if somebody
Is it just becoming semantics, though? I mean, because...
Do they think we've learned to live on less money? I mean, I wasn't in this mix back then, but I mean, I'm assuming there were draconian reductions in certain areas, and so institutions had to figure out how to do things more efficiently or do more with less.
Sure, some biennia were, that's, again, the challenge to, please fund this rate, please fund growth. These are complex, multi-soundbite narratives you have to try to communicate. Sure, there were big 05 or 07. Some of those years were much worse than others. And yes, we adjusted, right? We all took adjustments and delivered services differently than we did in the apparently good old days of 99, 2000.
I guess it's hard to know. Maybe some do. I don't. But maybe when they did this reduction, behind the scenes, they're watching these increases to see if they reset the calendar, so to speak, to the to the major reduction back in. When did the major reduction happen? 06? 07?
There was one in 5, and then there was
are
one
they
in
thinking
11.
Yeah, are they thinking that the increases since then are keeping up with inflation? Not that they have an interest in getting back to the original funding amounts, but would they think the increases are sufficient? I mean, the other option is to go to a percentage increase, but we're much closer to our goal on some of these that have much less importance from a dollar perspective than we are the ones that bring more dollars to the institution. So I don't know. I think in some ways, I think if we waver on what we asked for, we're convoluting our message to say, well, really, it's changed and that's not important anymore. If it's unrealistic, it doesn't make the need any less.
That's right. In Ray's comments, opening comments, he was getting back to that funding is doubtful. So keep that in mind. Does he just think that's such an unattainable goal?
Last time the recommendation of the committee was modified when the coordinating board recommended to the LBB, I think, and so it was mixed up a little bit. Some were a little higher, some were a little lower, and I'm assuming maybe they thought that was a more presentable package or more likely to have fewer alterations or cuts once presented, that maybe it would be more buy-in than what we'd submitted.
I think that's fair.
And we got less than what even the commissioner recommended.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, advisory to recommenders. Some degrees of separation there.
Exactly.
Plausible deniability.
We did, for sure, yeah. So are you suggesting? Right, is it the messaging? Right, is it the messaging that you think we need to modify?
I'm suggesting I'm just opening up the point that for 8 or 10 years now, I guess, after this one, I think it'll be at least 8 years, that our message has been, please get us back. And I think we split it and said do it over 3 biennia, right? Did we do that?
Right.
We've had variations on that theme, but basically the guide star has been get us back to those 99, 2,000 per unit funding amounts, be it FTSE, base rate, or research.
It's a tired old message, but it's pungent to some degree.
Yeah.
Talking about the fact that we're not even where we were, 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Although, of course, the legislature tends to look at it, but we put, $19 million in it. We put $27 million into the formulas. Yeah, I'm just making sure we're all comfortable.
Yeah,
Continuing to flog that horse.
I think that some of the data that we include in the report in terms of the growth and the need for healthcare workers, I think is still very potent, whether it's effective or not. I think it's an important message. So how we get there need exists. I think we can maybe just talk about that when we get to the report.
Okay.
So yes, build increases in ed.
Yeah.
That's a no-brainer.
Yeah, however we get there.
In
A lot
the
more.
last report, which I think you have a copy of that in your packet, there was a section that really needs to be updated by our peer institutions here, because Ed doesn't have really access to the information. And I believe it is on it's in the executive summary section. I believe it's probably these bulleted points are on page 1 and 2. Is that right, Ed?
Right, it's that first introductory section, basically, pages 1 and 2.
So it has to do with the health, the workforce shortages and.
Yeah, the new survey comes out.
November,
Scott, I
right, or
think, actually, might have been the scribe.
November.
Yeah, okay, so we always get that.
So it's one of those last minute kind of things that.
Right.
I think for the benefit of the new members, I think the way that I've recommended this be approached is this executive summary is your opportunity to explain to the legislature why you want this money and et cetera. And that's a piece that I personally do not know, and I think it's y'all's opportunity to use it to your advantage.
So was it Houston? Wasn't it you guys, Kevin, that got this data for us? You have
Yes.
access to that survey, I guess.
Happy to do that again.
Okay. We'll just hold that.
Seems like a
It's a
secretary.
job, it's a job, right?
Yeah.
See, you were doing it all along.
See.
It was your fault.
Preordained.
So Kevin's going to do that.
But again, we won't have it till.
Right.
Towards the
Right,
end of
we'll
the
just leave a
process.
placeholder
Probably
there.
after the draft. Just have a first draft.
Exactly.
Does that mean we don't really want to talk about items 2 or 3 either? Or do you think we need to go ahead and discuss those? It's all kind of linked together.
Yeah, I guess we can deal with those now. Is there any interest in changing weights? With the exception of including new programs. Bioinformatics.
Once more into the breach of bioinformatics. I don't think I have the heart for it this time.
No.
I can only do it at every. It's like
Every
the
other.
Olympics. I can only do it every
4 years.
4 years ago, you got a cost study.
Yeah. That was
So
good.
that's an item that could be separate from the funding level item. So we could make a motion on that one if we feel we're at a point where we could
Just leave the weights.
square that one away and get it off the table.
Mhm.
Does anybody want to make a motion on that?
I'll make a motion on it.
Is there a second?
What's the no, I didn't.
Oh, yeah, state your motion.
No motion.
That we leave the weights as they are,
Okay.
current farmer funding.
Is there a second?
Look at me. I think you should say
I seconded everything today.
that. You're an
Second.
attentive.
There you go. Those takes the tech guys stick together.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I guess.
These
the
guys
motion-
won't vote against
motion
it, they just
carries.
want second motions.
Yeah. So, something about the record.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a holdover from last time.
I support it. I said I need to know.
This is only if we're going to bring
Yeah.
in different programs.
You gotta cover it.
Right, if there are other
Yeah.
specialty programs, that's why I made the joke
Okay,
about
so that one,
bioinformatics.
is that a no for now?
I think so.
Okay.
Close that one.
Well,
Do we-
need to
Close that one.
Probably
So we
there's
won't
no
vote on it?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want, does somebody want to make a motion that for now, recommendation of including, recommendations for inclusion and weight of specialty programs in the I know formula is not, there's nothing moving forward with that,
So
with existing programs? Second.
All right, let's have one discussion
Just
now for a
discussion
second.
now?
Oh, okay, discussion.
All right, does that preclude potentially one possibility is, and I think it's already been thrown out here, that we talk about medicine rates in the HRI formula, but it be at a different level than the rates for the health-related institutions.
I don't
As a
think that
possibility.
precludes that. Yeah, I think we could still
Yeah.
talk about that in.
I
insurance
think
one.
that would be under number one as a new situation.
Okay. I'm not proposing it, guys, yet. I'm just sure you don't take it off the table.
Sounds like some groundwork establishment there, if you don't know. That's all I
Yeah.
think.
Call the question.
Okay, is there support, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Man, you just keep going, we might finish this today.
Right.
Okay. What else do we have here?
Well, the fourth, any discussion on the fourth item?
Yeah, on the commissioner's charges.
60/30.
Study
Oh, well, yeah, the
recommendations on
60/30. So the 60/30, hopefully you've had a chance to look at that, but it seems, even though I know it's also intended for the health-related institutions, it seems to be more directly applicable to the general academic campuses from the standpoint of being able to achieve specific items. But the goals are pretty much stated in the executive summary. It has to do with by 2030, 60% of Texans ages 25 to 34 would have a certificate or a degree. And I think you heard Commissioner Paradas talk about that, so there's quite a gap or quite a leap to get there. I think that's probably something the health-relateds don't really achieve because you've got to have the bachelor first, or you've got to have the associate's degree first, or a certificate. So, but we can certainly enhance that beyond the original degree. And then the second goal is that 550,000 students will complete a certificate or associate. So that's basically a minimum increase, I guess, in that. So that includes masters. So we could impact that goal. But I think that's just through our normal course of expanding programs and enrollments and growing our education programs, but also being aware of admission standards and access and those types of things. And also programs that help identify likely candidates that want to matriculate into our types of programs. Then the third goal is that by 2030, graduates from Texas public institutions of higher education will have completed programs with identified marketable skills, and that probably is going to be a milestone or a measure about are they able to get jobs in their area of educational study, and we know a lot of people enter educational study paths that they don't end up getting a job in that particular area. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to be linked that way. But I guess we can help in that way, too, through our normal course of action. And then the undergraduate student loan debt, that doesn't really affect us, I guess, from an undergraduate perspective. But so does that exclude graduate? I guess it does.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So we're good for the medical students. They can graduate with 150%.
Yeah, or $135,000 or whatever it is nowadays. Okay. But we would keep that in mind, I think, and I guess we'll have to address that in the report to some extent.
I do think we probably have data on our graduation rates and our,
We do.
the enrollment growth in the HRIs, the number of healthcare professionals we're putting into the workforce as Texas state institutions. So I think that we could certainly comment on that without having to necessarily change the formulas or
I agree.
the business. And even, I think we have data on job placement for our graduates. So we could probably
I believe we have
collect that data.
Ed, was there anything specific as they crafted this document toward the health relateds that
Not
you're
to my
aware of?
knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
Did we say something like that in
In the last report?
the front? I don't think that we did, but we certainly could.
It wasn't in the charges, it doesn't look like it was
Yeah, we
restated in the
talked
back
about
there.
the need,
And how we fulfill
Yeah,
that
we
need.
can, yeah, we can address that, I think.
Any other discussion on that item? Or we're ready to move to the dates and assignments?
I think so.
Do they have this?
No.
Okay. There are dates that have been established, I believe, by the coordinating board.
We have, all the members do know the dates, that is
Okay.
what's in that.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but the next meeting is
September 9th.
September 9th at 10 a.m.
All the meetings are here.
Let's see, these future meetings will be in the boardroom, and they will be televised, or streamed, whatever the word is.
Are we okay with the time? I know that last time, in the interest of people's travel, I think we changed our time, didn't we, to 1 o'clock as opposed to 10, or did we stick with 10? I can't remember.
I think we stuck with the
We did?
morning, if
Okay.
I'm not mistaken, but
I think
Because it was, I don't know, and others
So
have
is it still
traveled.
good for everyone to meet at 10?
Mine hasn't been to Southwest Airlines, they change their schedules.
So, does anybody have any major conflicts with these dates? I think stay pretty much on track.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would sear those into your calendar so that you're ready. Do we need to do a recap or anything?
Did we decide what we're doing about this? If we're doing anything about this space model? I think we've moved on to the medical school before we decided
yeah.
if we were,
Oh, you're right.
are we?
well, that's, I mean, it's, I guess, if you want to open that for a discussion and maybe perhaps a work group, that might be a choice. And then, if you're at a point that you could give me a recommendation on cranking some numbers for next time, I'll be happy to do that. But if you're not, I can wait.
I guess, we did get away from that, and I had a few questions I'd written down in regard to that. And,
Okay.
and so I was wondering what was the original rationale for reducing the expenditures by the hospital and clinical revenues for sales and services?
I don't believe there's an answer for that at this point in time, John. I went back and did some research, and I started in the fall of 2005. The adjustment was being made then, and it was a combination of pulling numbers off of people's Strecna, as well as surveying two of the institutions for their specific numbers. I don't know that there's anybody still alive that knows exactly why it was done or the rationale behind it.
And then 2 points I would just invite some thought about, and that is, if you have a good revenue stream and basically have revenues exceeding expenses in relation to the hospitals and clinics, I guess the argument is your expense numbers are lower than they should be because you're subsidizing other expenditure areas that are not related to clinics and hospitals. And then the flip side would be if you had an inefficient revenue stream or you don't have a profitable hospital or clinics, you're basically to some extent being subsidized through the state formula because you don't have enough revenue to offset those particular expenses. But I guess I wonder, and I don't know this firsthand, but I've heard from time to time that there's some inconsistencies in reporting expenses related to hospitals and clinics, and in some cases they're reported under instruction. And that may be for institutions that have less of a mission-based budget or maybe do not have a rigid funding methodology for service area or mission contribution by faculty. I know our institution didn't have a really rigid model in place for a number of years, but I think that's been fixed in the last several years. But so I guess what I'm saying is you could still have a subsidy situation, or you could have inflated expenses if, in fact, you have clinical or salary expenses under instruction that are really for people involved in the clinical side of things. And how would we know that, since there's always some variations in institutional reporting that are not necessarily out of compliance, but are somewhat subjective sometimes?
Well, I don't know that we would necessarily know that. There was, when these documents were sent to the institutions for completion, there were, the NACUBO standards were sent, definitions were sent with it. And our request, this is a part of the sources and uses submission. I think it's our expectation that institutions follow the NACUBO classifications as they're written now. If they're not, I mean, we don't have an audit staff that goes out and audits that. So I guess at this point it's on the honor system.
So would we want to come back prepared to discuss this in more detail and try to have?
I guess. I mean, I think, I raised it because it was sent to the committee, and so I'm assuming that it was sent because the coordinating board plans to change the methodology, or believes that the methodology is inappropriate.
I think our position is the methodology is inappropriate because you're reducing costs by revenues that are unrelated to those costs. And I think just from the good old cost accounting perspective, why are you mixing both sides of the ledger here?
So yeah, then I think we just need to come back prepared to talk about it, because I just look at the outcome.
Yeah.
Well,
it's not good for me.
Thank you for being so transparent.
I always am.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room.
And I won't speak for you, but you should be worried too. I'm just kidding.
I'm just cagey.
I know.
You knew that.
I think there are, obviously, the solution, the alternative presented here is what I call the technical solution to the problem. You could do various alternatives, like perhaps recommending hold harmless, doing other things like that, or I guess you could recommend no change. I mean, I don't know that, I don't think the coordinating board has entertained any discussions about what we would do if it was no change.
Ed, you went back to the coordinating board archives and tried to figure out, why was this being treated? Why was it
No,
handled that
I
way,
looked.
or
I mean,
you
I
couldn't
have
find anything?
access to those, and I could find no records that relate to this prior to 2005.
So if we had, I wouldn't really oppose a hold harmless for those that are getting impacted. It just means there has to be more funding in the formula. But it does seem to compromise the formula itself, though, because then you have to have a plug number. Mm-hmm. And then does that plug number adjust over time when the formula, funds increase? Does that plug number increase proportionately, or what happens?
And it may not increase.
It may not.
So I don't know if perhaps the committee would like to consider a work group and to discuss this item, or if you want to be the committee of the whole.
I move that we have a work group. I'm consistent on that.
All right.
I second. I'm consistent on that.
Any discussion?
You seconded the motion.
He just wants to be in the minutes.
I'm happy to be the convener of that one if that helps administratively.
No discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right.
So the expectation is that both groups would meet in advance of the next meeting, right?
And
Which is
report
September
back to
9th.
the,
Yeah.
to the committee
Okay.
with
Back to
recommendations.
your question, you still need direction in order to produce some runs.
Yeah, I still need some direction on rates.
Were we in the second year of the 3-year recommendation?
I think we are. I mean, if I can offer an option if y'all want me to
Second
run
iteration of the 8th
the
year.
0001 numbers and let y'all take a look at them. I'll be happy to do that as a,
It's a good starting point.
to
Yes.
move
Yeah, I
along,
agree.
to move the
So-
train along.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
the-
that's good.
Because we fell short so much in this 16-17, the next one would be the third and final, which is a
Right.
huge gap now, so.
Right.
Well, it's not sexy, but the one we're really falling behind is that infrastructure. I mean, funding for our, just turning on the lights in the buildings is an issue with the rates that we're
Yeah.
appropriating today.
It's not far behind.
Way behind, yeah.
I think I've got everything I need.
All right, I think, is there any other business to be discussed? If not,
Let me make one announcement. There is, we do have a meeting tomorrow afternoon with the two medical schools to go through some of the issues and go through the CBM reports on essentially a field-by-field basis. So just to keep the committee informed that the coordinating board is continuing to work those issues.
Good, so you may have some more issues to add to the pros and cons list.
sounds like.
Who is in that meeting?
Well, it's going to be, I guess, Julie Ekman and David Young and I presume someone, I think Lincoln's going to be there.
Oh, okay.
I think
Susan Brown.
Susan's going to be there.
Probably our finance person, Susan Scheffler.
And,
This is not on my calendar.
okay.
Okay. If there's no other business, then I guess we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.